Sí, ¿no?
Ah, bueno.
I think we're okay.
No throwing tomatoes.
I've got to be able to take notes here. Are we?
You realize we should. Those seats could be people's seats, right?
Yeah.
We can just take our cups away, huh? Anyway.
Not sure. Hello.
Very good. Ah, you're the silent person. All right.
Hey, great. Or Allison. Am I on?
I have huge respect for how you can listen and interpret at the same time. Like, I can't do. It's hard enough for me to do one of those.
Should I start?
Took a lot of mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you happen to
Hello,
have
everybody.
people in the audience?
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Virtual audience.
Virtual audience. Yeah. Okay.
Should we do that? If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Perfect. Thank you all. Welcome to this very exciting conversation. At least exciting for me, and I hope exciting for all of you. I know it's going to be exciting for our panelists, too. We want to welcome you. We want to thank you for staying with us. We know this has been a long day, a full day of conversation and learning and rethinking. So we're very happy that you have made it to the closing plenary of our session on a now cold and blustery Friday afternoon. And I also want to welcome those who are joining online. We are now live streaming out this session as well, so it's good to have you back with us or joining us for the first time, those of you who are joining online. My name is Jennifer O'Donoghue. Please call me Jen. And if we haven't met yet today or on other days, I am a senior fellow here at CUE. I head up the Gender Equality in and Through Education team, and I also serve as Deputy Director of CUE. And we would like to start, before I go there, I want to just say that joining me is this great panel who has asked that we not do lengthy introductions. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for Rakesh, Alicia, and Juan Alfonso for being here. Please take a look at their bios. We have a great group of people here for this conversation today and to learn with them. And we wanted to start our conversation with an opening reflection. And we want to invite all of you to do the same reflection. So I just want to invite you to find someone next to you, preferably someone you haven't talked with too much today, if that's possible, but don't feel like you have to move around, and just spend 2 minutes. So we'll take 1 minute each and share one thing that has stuck with you from today's activities or conversations so far. So just turn to the person next to you and share one thing.
O sea, todos estos desmadres de conversación los has hecho tú.
Estamos en vivo ahorita. Okay. I think we're going to come back. We'll do the clapping.
Used to be with them.
If you can hear me, clap once.
But he's the one.
And if you can hear me, clap twice.
Collaborating.
If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Perfect. Okay. I know that was a very short conversation, and we're excited that after this panel, we will be having a reception, so that hoping you can continue those reflections and in thinking and talking about what has stuck with you from today. I am now going to turn to our panelists and ask the same question. So I will start with Alicia and ask Alicia, what is one thing that you have seen, heard, or experienced today that has resonated with you or really stuck with you?
One thing that keeps coming back to me is the image that Rebecca put up in the opening plenary with the iceberg. And she talked about the power of the invisible elements and talking about mental models and the importance of knowing how to, of shifting mental models. And I keep coming back to the importance of also taking the time to understand all of the things that are beneath the iceberg, or beneath the water.
Great, thank you so much. Juan Alfonso.
Well, I will say scaling. Finding a formula is problematic itself, but scaling is another problem. So you might find a very good formula, but the ones that you would try to scale it from up or down is one way, and it's problematic itself. And from the bottom to the up, it's another problem. So that's a very good reflection in the other room.
Great. Thank you. And Rakesh, same question for you.
Yeah, the discussion on, it was also the discussion on scaling to think about the enabling environment and the winning coalition, right? In order to make this shift happen, it's hugely difficult task, and you need a winning coalition, which isn't just your like-minded people. It's not just people like yourselves who you share values with, but people who actually have the power that you need to make that change happen. And that part was particularly interesting.
Great, thank you. And thank you all so much. And, I think these three reflections, we didn't plan this in advance, but they seem to all be related to the conversation that we'll have today around civil society's role in systems transformation. And what are those pieces that we need to understand? What are the invisible elements that we need to take the time to understand in terms of the role of civil society? How do we think about the scaling and the expanding the impact and creating winning coalitions? I think is also an important part of thinking about civil society's role. So, I just wanted to let everybody know. I think you all heard in the morning, Rebecca mentioned that as part of CUE's strategy moving forward, we are looking to build a global leadership coalition of civil society organizations that will be working to transform education systems around the world. I will be sharing specific details about that. We have the official launch of that open call for participation at the end of our conversation today, so that's just to make sure you don't leave before then. In this time together, we really want to explore some of the roles that CSOs can and do play in education systems transformation, and where, when, and how CSOs have taken this on and where they haven't, and what have been some of those challenges. And this is, one, because we share a passion for civil society organizations, and two, because as CUE moves into this new phase of our work, specifically with this leadership coalition, we want to be really thoughtful about how we're doing it, and we want to have clarity and make visible what are some of the challenges and the pieces that we need to be thinking about along the way. So having said that, I will move into sort of a first round of conversation, which is really around the role of civil society organizations in sustaining momentum for systems transformation. So, we all, I think, have talked about throughout the day how challenging it can be to sustain a movement for systems transformation, and we have some evidence and growing evidence that CSOs can have an important role in this. It's something that's not often achieved in the lifetime, I don't want to say lifetime, in the administration time of a minister of education, of a governor, of a prime minister, of a president. And it is also something that, by definition, challenges the status quo, right? And challenges that stability or inertia that systems have that we talked about in the morning. And so, Rakesh, I want to start with you. When we had our conversation, the four of us, to plan for today, one of the things that you spoke about was a common error in education, which is to look for or apply technical solutions to what are fundamentally political and institutional problems. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you see that CSOs can effectively play a role here in not only navigating, but also really shaping and informing what is this inherently political space of education systems transformation?
Sure, thanks, Jen. It's very much been the topic of the entire day, at least the sessions I went to, right? So to help kids learn how to read and count, to have girls complete secondary education and leave with confidence, those things are hard, but we know how to do them. There are important technical aspects to those that we need to get right, and we more or less have figured out how to do that. The problem is, how do they become real at scale on the ground? And that involves two things that I think we are less good at. One is, what does it take to turn a bureaucracy around? And I use the term bureaucracy consciously, right? It is a bureaucracy. I don't think many of us really know how to do that. And that doesn't just involve getting the top policymakers, as several of you have remarked today, but it particularly means paying attention to the middle level. All right, what does it mean to work at a block level in India or a district level in most of our countries? How does that transform? How does a teacher who's in the classroom wake up in the morning super motivated to do her work every single day? That's what it takes to turn a bureaucracy around. The other is a kind of keen understanding of how power works, power and motivation, right? Often the people who look formally in charge are not the ones who can actually shift things. You might be the Minister for Education, but you may have very little power to turn it around. So it's figuring out who is it? Is it the bishop? Is it the musician? Is it the Minister for Mining who is connected to the president and may have a greater influence on education rather than the Minister for Education? It's those sorts of things that need to be figured out. And I think a lot of the time we're not good at this because we go with what we're comfortable with. And this is where I think the fact that there's a predominance of international NGOs and donor thinking in this has also affected this. Because people who are outsiders, who do not have the deep contextual knowledge and the relationships about a place, they don't know how to do political economy, right? So they stick to the technical stuff. I grew up in Tanzania, where I'm from, where there was, I'm going to pick on the Swedes for a change, there was lots of wonderful Swedish people trying to reform education for decades. And they did a lot of training, and they did a lot of manuals and so on. Not because that is what we really needed, because that's what they knew how to do. And they did not have the credibility to talk about politics. And so to coming to civil society, I think that's the role, right? We need to stop kind of running around being subcontractors of donor-funded projects. We need to become people who deepen our relationships with our own constituencies in country, figure out our politics. We know them. We may not write them in our proposals, but when we sit at the bar in the evening, we know the political economy. It's to bring that knowledge and relationships to bear in terms of figuring out what it takes to turn a bureaucracy around. And final point, I think for civil society organizations to play that part, they need the kind of long-term funding and support and legitimacy and space to play that part, which often doesn't go along with the kind of short-term donor-funded projects. So even as the Brookings CU initiative that we're going to hear about rolls out, it'll be interesting to see how it is planning to roll those relationships out and to allow for this kind of long-term political engagement on the ground level, which is what you need to turn bureaucracies around.
Great. Thank you so much. Alicia or Juan Alfonso, do either of you have an example maybe or a story of a CSO or a coalition that may have sustained a movement for change? And any thoughts on what we could learn from that?
One coalition that comes to mind, or a group of civil society organizations, I'm thinking about CSOs that are working in Myanmar or who have been working to advance inclusive and equitable education in Myanmar or Burma, and the extent to which they are able to sustain their own work regardless of what is happening politically or even in the funding arena. And so thinking about organizations that have been working across the border in Thailand to provide training and support and services to ethnic minorities that are outside or that are kept outside of the system, and how when the democratic transition happened some years ago, they were able to move inside and work more openly inside the country. And then when things shifted or reverted back to what had happened, what the previous context, they essentially just continued their work and went back across the border. And I think sometimes we miss that the extent to which CSOs that are deeply rooted in their communities operate, whether we are aware of them or not, whether we recognize or even provide catalytic or significant funding to them or not. And so in terms of what we can learn about that is that when we're looking at systems transformation or any types of social change movement, to actually make sure that we're looking for the organizations that were already or have already been doing the work before it became popular, before it became a funder priority.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. Sorry, I think that's really important. One thing that we've been trying to think through in terms of the selection process of how we choose these 10 organizations is sort of that issue of credibility, and I want to say it in quotes, but how do we know if it's visible, when it's not visible? I think the point you're making about organizations are working there and operating whether we recognize it or not, and so how are we also able to see those organizations, right? And not just the organizations that may have a lot more support. And we'll get to the question of support a little bit more later, but that's a great point. Sorry, Juan Alfonso.
Well, I think that the magic word is incentives. So you need to understand how the system of incentives work in that particular country. So in 2013, we were able to guide educational reform and to make it through the whole government from 2013 to 2018. I think that it was a very good educational reform, but with the new government, they just put it backwards. So we didn't understand, because we were there, that in Mexico, the incentives, they are not maybe with the educational system, okay? So I come from a province that is called Sinaloa. Maybe some of you have heard about it. And if you don't create opportunities for young people, crime organization will create it for them. So if you don't create very good opportunities for childs and youngsters, because once they finish school, they will earn a salary that is impossible to make it through, well, crime organization will be there for them. So with this in the head, we went through a survey from 2019 through 2022, and we were asking the Mexican people, this is a survey with a statistical value, national statistical value, and we were asking them, out of the 8 subjects that we are to talk about that we are to propose it to you, which one do you think that affect the most the country? And we put there Mexico, education, sorry. And education was 7 out of 8, with 5.9%, okay? And then we change it to, what do you think that affect you the most? So it will feel like more closely. And then education went 8 out of 8, with 1.7. So it is not that Mexicans don't care about education, but we haven't been able, the people that cares about education, to relate problems that care to public opinion, insecurity, income, corruption, and educational system. So I think definitely it's a political matter and not a technical solution.
Yeah, thank you. And I think points too to the fact that often we think of civil society organizations working in relationship to government and trying to convince policymakers, but often it's also around how do we motivate people, right? We need to have that public backing, and I'm going to say with full transparency, since Juan Alfonso already mentioned it, that we worked together for many years in civil society in Mexico. So want to move a bit into, we had an audience question around how should civil society and education stakeholders work together to align their efforts to achieve effective transformation. And one of the other roles that's sort of posited for civil society organizations and systems transformation is being a bridge, and really being a bridge between and among actors in the education ecosystem, and these could be, a bridge between policymakers and schools, communities, families, students, mid-level bureaucrats, bringing in media sometimes too into the education space. And I really want to, this sort of bridge can be used for different reasons, right? So civil society can be involved in agenda setting, trying to set priorities, often is in accountability and evaluation and equity, movements for equity. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about the often complex relationship that CSOs have in particular with local government. And we do have some evidence, it's correlations to date, that with greater CSO presence, we see better education outcomes. So I think that it's an area that we will be delving into much deeper to really understand this role and build the evidence base around CSOs and education outcomes. But this relationship between governments and CSOs is often fraught and complicated. And Juan Alfonso, I want to start with you. So I will just say for everyone that Juan Alfonso has had a perhaps unusual career that has woven between CSO spaces and government spaces. So he worked in the Federal Ministry of Education, where his unofficial job was to monitor civil society activity in education. And then he was the founder of a local state-level civil society organization in Sinaloa, which he mentioned. And then moved to the national level civil society organization, and then most recently was Minister of Education of the state of Sinaloa. So he's gone back and forth in those two spaces, and I think that has given you a very unique perspective. And so the question to you is, what did you learn from these experiences about this relationship between CSOs and government or policymakers?
Well, as you said, it is a complex relation where there is always a tension between the two actors, and that tension is related to the level or the healthy level of a democratic regime. That's very important because that's the way that the government is going to understand himself. So if you ask a public servant, I think in Latin America, to whom belong the public schools? Do they belong to whom? I think the public servant will say to the government, okay? And I think that the society will say to the government. They don't understand that it's a common good. So that's like one of the things that I really learned from outside and being inside. So bureaucrats, they think that they're gonna be there for 25, 30 years and no one will care, so they need to survive. So before starting a strategic decision that might change the system, they need to think that that minister is gonna move. So I should care more, so what is gonna happen later on if I want to stay here, okay? And the civil society, and I'm gonna say it, and I'm already here, so. Civil society needs to understand that opportunism, not opportunity, opportunism, it's a great talent, value in political matters. So it is not an ethical question. It is not a technical question. It's about politics. It's about survival. So civil society needs to understand the right moment, needs to understand how to create the conditions so politicians can act. And the politicians will bring the applause with them, and civil society will stay like right behind. But civil society is very hard to civil society to understand that. So I think that's where, because once the minister or the government leaves, he needs to leave some stakes. So the progress, so you will create incentives for the next one, so he can keep or she can keep going, and it will be worse if he backwards. And I think that you need to think about that during the whole process.
Thank you. Rakesh and Alicia, again, when we had our sort of prep conversation for this, we talked about the prevailing narratives, right, on each side. That there's the prevailing narrative that civil society has about government, and then there's the narrative government has about civil society. And one of the challenges and really the needs is to learn to move beyond some of those prevailing narratives in order to effectively work together. So I'm wondering if you have seen anything in your experience that demonstrates that we can move beyond, and how we can move beyond some of those narratives on both sides and really start to work together more effectively.
Well, in my experience, I think before we talk about moving beyond, then we have to look at some of those invisible elements. I'm going to keep coming back to the, the bottom of the iceberg. And it's interesting because when we talk about government, we often talk about them as a monolithic, and it's interesting. The commissioner from Nigeria this morning talked about the preponderance of top-down initiatives. And so part of my work, sometimes I work with Chemonics as a partner with them, and in designing system strengthening initiatives for systemic transformation or systems transformation, it always starts with the central government and then trickles down to local government. And oftentimes, as we know, with development projects, the trickle down doesn't always reach where it needs to happen. But still, when the initiatives come again, it still starts at the top. So I think just understanding the relationships, before we get to the relationship between government and civil society, the relationships between various levels and elements of government actors and government stakeholders, and understanding how they can work more effectively together and what they need to be able to work more effectively together. Similarly, with civil society, I think just understanding, and maybe it's just my own bias, but when we talk about civil society and systems change, I often think initially about national level organizations that have a clear policy advocacy agenda, and overlooking or not necessarily appreciating the power that exists at the grassroots level and at the district and regional levels with civil society, and how those organizations within a country or within a region, the importance of networking them so that they can learn from each other and strengthen relationships among each other, so that, as Juan said, when civil society creates the conditions within which government can act, that the conditions are relevant to all the levels in the system. And an example of that, I can say, is the Regional Education Learning Initiative that I've been working with. It's a project or a strategy that's funded by Wellspring Philanthropy Advisors that networks 70 civil society organizations across East Africa to help them to speak with one voice, to push for change on behalf of, or to improve learning outcomes for vulnerable children. So they are actually creating the conditions within which governments can act to shift systems and create policy change.
Thank you.
Let me tell you about a mistake I made for probably a decade or 15 years. So I'm Tanzanian. For about 25 years in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, I've worked for civil society. And the kind of primary model we had was, as a civil society organization, our job was to hold the government's feet to the fire. We were the watchdog. We would speak the truth to power. We would use data, evidence, show all the ways in which the government is failing to do what it itself did, right? And it had an effect. It was important. But at the end of the day, that model assumes that saying the truth will somehow shame government into doing the right thing. Now, in our context, that's not how the political economy of governments works. It actually probably throws their back up. They become closed. They become defensive. You actually incentivize in government the kind of hiding of truth-telling because it doesn't serve them well to do so. And what that also fails to do is empower the people inside government, the reformers, the people who have ethical standards. To Alicia's point, government is not monolithic. There are some incredible people in government at all levels who are trying to make a change happen. The question for civil society should be, how are we acting in a way that strengthens their ability, their incentives, and the enabling conditions for them to be able to do more powerful work? And it's only, sadly for me, it took me too long to figure that out. And when we did, we started seeing greater results than when we were just playing the watchdog role. So I would say two things that are really important in my experience. One is empathy for people in government. I'm not trying to be naive. Yes, there is corruption. Yes, there are people who don't do their jobs. There's all kinds of problems in government, absolutely, and we should not lose sight of that. But if we want to make change happen, we need to show up with a posture of empathy towards those in government who are trying to make things happen and see how we can bring out their better selves. The other thing I think that we often do is in our relentless critique of government, we actually undermine the role of government and the position of the idea that government is us. It's not this big bad thing up there that does bad things to us, but rather it is a reflection of our public compact. And the government is going to be as good as we make it. So unwittingly, very progressive civil society organizations, by critiquing government all the time, play into a right-wing agenda. The government should be small and should be out of our way. So these are two things that I think are really crucial for civil society to get right. I want to be very clear. I don't mean just mollycoddle. I don't mean hide things. I do think truth and purpose should always be guiding. But with that there, our goal should be, how do we get government to make work better for us rather than just critiquing government?
Thank you so much. I want to take a moment to see if there are any questions among the rest of you. So does anyone have a question? We have microphones. Okay, we have a question over here. If there's another one, we could take maybe two and then have some responses.
Hi, thank you. I'm Don Purok. I'm from the University of Michigan. What's interesting is you've juxtaposed civil society and government, but there's been no discussion of markets and commercial organizations or the professions, all of which bring stability to education systems in a lot of cases. And I'm wondering where those organizations fit in the narrative that you're crafting about transforming education systems.
Okay. Is there another question that we want to add to that before we respond?
Thank you for your comments, all of you on the panel. I'm Claudia Costin from Brazil. I helped create a civil society organization there in 2006, which had a very important role in the country. It is called, in Portuguese, sorry to say the name in Portuguese first, Todos pela Educação, or All for Education. It was created to be an advocacy organization to push for quality and equity in public education. Nobody was the voice of the children. You know, everybody's talking either for the teachers or for the interests of the government. And we did a research and noticed that the parents thought that education was good quality in Brazil, which was not true. And so we decided to begin to monitor and evaluate learning and quality. And in doing so, we realized that there was a need to increase the quality of schools, ensure that all the kids are in schools and that they are continuing and progressing in schools and learning. And I'm just telling this to say that, yes, civil society's organization can, Juan Alfonso, work with governments, and we can think of public schools as schools that belong to the people of a country. And this makes a whole difference. And yes, the professions should be represented. I think this is a very good point, but we need to make sure that the attractiveness of the career of teacher becomes relevant. Otherwise, you are dealing with teachers that are not motivated to do their work. You are mentioning this. And in that aspect, also civil society organizations might have an impact, showing societies that it is not only the unions that want good salaries. It is good for the kids that they have a good salary. It's not only through strikes. Sorry to take so long to make much more of a comment, but I think it was It was one of the best cases that I saw in my country, especially during this period that we had, sorry to talk about politics, Bolsonaro as a president. I don't envy us, please.
Okay. So to our panelists, Rakesh, Alicia, Juan Alfonso, do you want to take on this question of what about the market, the professions, others? It's not just a binary between civil society and government.
I mean, you're right. Obviously, it depends very much on each context, right? So the context that I'm more familiar with, most of the education for primary and secondary is provided by public entities. Private providers play a smaller role, but they are an important role, and it all depends on what it is you're trying to do. Sometimes they're more relevant than others. The market actors become very important in the winning coalition, right? So often when you, for example, when we were in East Africa working to refocus on learning outcomes as opposed to schooling inputs, some of the greatest allies were corporate sector leaders, not because they were running schools, but because they were very worried about the kind of skills base that they needed. And they were a key partner in making the case, and in some ways were much more effective than the civil society organizations. As far as the professionals, yeah, again, the same thing happens. I think as we know, the role of teachers' trade unions vary widely from context to context. In Kenya, for example, to try to work with Canute, those who've tried to do that will tell you it's a very long story. Whether, depending on what you want to do, you want them either close or very far away from you. Other professions. So I think the short answer is yes, they matter, but how they matter varies very much based on where and what you're trying to achieve.
Anyone else want to jump on that? Oh, we have another, okay.
How to navigate the politics of the international NGO community?
Is that a separate panel? No. We need another hour. No.
Well, speaking of markets, right, and competition. Well, one example, a couple of examples actually that I see. I think continuing to build relationships amongst yourselves, either around issues or in the geographies where you work, to collaborate to create really tools and products and processes that actually rival those of international NGOs, because I think that will help you get to a space, because I imagine you're talking about the funding issue. That'll help you get to a space where I think those that fund international NGOs will have to really just do some more introspection on where they put their where they're putting their money.
I'm going to build off of this international question to talk a bit. So the focus for our work in CUE and with the leadership coalition that we'll be talking about is really trying to work with local organizations defined as national or subnational organizations. And so we've been talking about that and sort of relationships in these local contexts, right? So relationships between actors, and we've been primarily focused on government, but I think it is very important to point out that this role of CSOs and this bridging role is a role that is CSOs to schools, to communities, with young people, with families, with labor unions, with did I say young people? I think I did already. It's getting late. Anyway, so it is this sort of broader thing. So I want to just say that we focus in on that a bit, on the government CSO relationship here, but understanding that it's broader than that. But one of the things that local CSOs really struggle with, and I'll speak from the experience here, is one, although we want to move beyond some of these narratives that have been less effective in terms of the relationship, it is the reality in many countries where governments use their power to limit, to silence, to shut down CSOs. And two, that even when local CSOs have the support of the policymakers, for example, there's often important resource constraints, and local civil society organizations are competing for resources and those, I know, for example, in Mexico, that, when COVID came, what happened to civil society was really dramatic, because suddenly resources were directed to, I think, importantly so, but emergency, right? And so a lot of the institutions and that make up a democracy around civil society organizations that weren't doing emergency response work really lost funding, and many of them shut down. So just thinking about these challenges that civil society organizations face in local contexts, wanted to invite us to talk a bit about the role of external supports, and specifically external supports at the global level, and how these types of supports can play out at the local level, and what we should think about. And I know, Alicia, this is something that you've been working on and has been a particular concern of yours for years. So I'd like to start with you, and just the question around what types of supports do CSOs, local CSOs, need to do the type of work we're talking about in education systems transformation, and if you have any examples of where those supports have worked well and where they haven't, what we should avoid doing.
I think, first of all, when thinking about the role of global actors, I think the role should be to create space for local CSOs, and then the supports that can be deployed to do that are, first of all, trust. And we talk about trust-based philanthropy and trust-based funding, and I think sometimes we might talk about it more so in the global north, as opposed to or amongst global actors, as opposed to local civil society organizations. And then the other piece, more importantly, or connected to the trust, is funding, and unrestricted funding for organizations to be able to carry out their missions and do their work in ways that they are able to conceptualize and define, as opposed to being in response to requests from donors or donor trends or international trends. So those two things definitely stands out for me: trust and funding. An example that stands out, one being the Regional Education Learning Initiative, another being another network that operates across East Africa, is Amplify Girls, and they have a very interesting mission. It's a network of about 25 to 30 community development or community-driven organizations that work with or support girls' agency. And their mission is about shifting or addressing the development narrative, or providing a counterbalance to the development narrative by networking and supporting community-driven organizations to define their own agendas, to define the narrative, and then also driving resources to them. So it's really interesting to see the extent to which you're seeing networks popping up, or intermediary organizations that exist specifically to amplify the voices of community-based or grassroots organizations, and to serve as a go-between, or as a fundraiser, in a sense, to drive resources directly to them.
Rakesh, or one of us, any?
Yeah, just building on what Alicia said. So four things come to mind, right? How is the agenda set and framed? How are decisions made? Right? When decision making happens, how are they made? Who's involved in those decisions? Third, how are budgets set and how are budgets allocated? I'm very curious of the 24 billion, how much of that is going to go here and how much is going to go to your partners, for example. And the fourth one is the way in which that relationship unfolds and the work unfolds, does it build the capabilities of organizations in the Global South, or does it just use them instrumentally to deliver certain outputs and outcomes, right? So at CoImpact, we are a funder now. One of our goals is that not only when we fund, not only that some wonderful things will happen in terms of people's lives and systems changing, But we are on the hook to make sure that those organizations we support are more powerful, more capable, more confident, more independent as a result of how we structure our support to them than when we started. So those 4 criteria, I think, are pretty good ones to look at the nature of this relationship and kind of decolonizing development.
Well, I just keep thinking about this word that Rebecca told at the beginning, one of the P's, which is purpose. And I think that maybe you can add a 4th one, which is power, but we already talked about it. But purpose, I think that is very related. I will ask the Brookings Institute to think, what does it mean to a local organization to be linked to the Brookings Institute in Washington? Okay, so think about the cities, not the countries, not the states, but the cities maybe, that are working and trying to find new ways, that are trying to find a new perspective, and they are alone, yeah. Okay, so, but they are linked to the Brookings Institute. So this goes to a question, what kind of civil society do we want to build? So you're going to need some organizations that work in practices, okay? But then you're going to need another kind of organizations that work in agenda. And that's going to be hard, both. Because in Mexico, if a professor is very good and wants to do his or her system, it will be impossible because he has to follow the rules, okay? But if this professor or this school finds a new way and can be linked to an organization that is linked at the same time to the Brookings Institute, that's different for the minister. Okay? And I don't want to, very quickly, I just had this experience when I was as a minister with Philips and said, we're never coming to Sinaloa because you don't have the 3,000 engineers that we have, that we need. So I started working right there with elementary schools in creating opportunities for the kids. Okay, so one kid goes to a school, that school is completing his or their mission as they are allowing a kid to go to look further, okay? But that's one kind of a problem. When you work with universities or with professional entities, it's about a specialization. I don't know if it's well said or not, okay? But competitiveness, yeah, something like that. Sorry about the pronunciation. Is not between countries, it's between regions. And regions, it's about localities, cities. And cities, it's about human resources. So I went with the Engineers Association and says, well, I want, as an educational minister, to Philips to come over and stay here. So what kind of specialization do we need? And then I went to the universities, and then I went to the national level. So I tried to change the curriculum. And so I think that universities, entrepreneurs, the ministers, social organizations, civil society organizations, that's where you can work very nearly or tied with these kinds of professional organizations.
I think one of the pieces that we've been reflecting on and that I think has come out of the conversation today, and to be honest, I'm sorry you all missed our preparatory conversation because that was also a really good one in that conversation as well, is really how, when you want to support something, you often end up interrupting processes that are in motion already, right? And so we've talked a bit about this sort of local, being municipal, as you were just saying, Juan Alfonso, or being state level, national, and I'll just share a personal experience when we were in Mexico that we, at the national level, at the CSO that we were working with, did a ranking of the states in terms of their compliance with the right to education. And in the end, we ranked someone first. And even though that person, as Claudia, you said, it wasn't like they were doing a really great job. We couldn't say, like, this state has the high quality education. It was just that this state is better right now than anyone else. But we went to the state and we were going to present this report, and the governor found out and got so excited and had a huge event with like a band, like a marching band and balloons and all of this to announce that they were #1. And after, even though in my, when I gave the speech, I sort of said, critiqued and said like, okay, yeah, it's in first place, but look, red here and red, it needs to work on this. But that message didn't make it through. But afterwards, these local civil society organizations came up to us and they said they were so angry because they had been working for 15 years to try to get the state together to move forward on this agenda that they needed to improve quality in the state. And they said, in one day you came here, and now the governor says, look, I'm #1, we're #1, you can't tell me that we're not doing what we need to do, et cetera. So for me, that was an extremely important lesson, and in this relationship between the levels, right, and how we don't want to do that. So are there tips, guidance, thoughts, reflections that you have on that as how, as Brookings, we can partner, as Juan Alfonso said, what does it mean for a local organization to be partnered with the Brookings Institution? How might that impact local processes, local power relationships, power dynamics, and what can we do to try to, I guess, mitigate undesired consequences like that?
I think, well, for a start, one thing is just thinking about the questions that you're asking yourselves. So even just having some, good contemplation and maybe doing some in your conversations, asking the questions, what are we disrupting? It was actually in your opening, you talked about how the I think Leadership Council, like you'll be identifying 10 organizations who will be leading systems, the agenda. And when you said that, in my mind, I thought, actually, who are the organizations that are already doing that? Because they do exist as individual organizations and as networks in geography. So trying to, paying attention to what's already happening, I think could strengthen your agenda. And also build on what's already going on.
Rakesh, you look like you really want to jump in.
I think whenever you have a partnership between the Global North and the Global South, it's really important, I think, for the Global North organization to take a posture of we are in service mode, right? We bring certain attributes and certain connections that can be helpful in service of organizations in the Global South that are leading the work, right? And you need to really interrogate what leadership means here, right? And how you make space, including when they go in directions that don't feel cool to you or don't feel comfortable to you. That doesn't mean, I'm not trying to romanticize that everybody in the Global South knows what they're doing and in the Global North, no, I'm not trying to say that, but it's when you invest in those relationships, it happens. I'll give you one quick anecdote. When I was running Twaweza, which is an East African organization, we had many partnerships with the Global North. We had a partnership with elite institutions, with MIT, Princeton, UCLA, for example, around evaluation. The way it worked, first we got the money from the donor. We set the agenda. We selected them, not the other way around. We paid them. We set the scope of work. And they did work in a way that was intellectually robust. We learned a lot from them. But that was the term of it. There was no question as to who was in charge. And at the end, what are we trying to achieve? Which was something which was an agenda set by us in Tanzania, and that was meant to further and advance the work we were trying to do there. And the value of MIT, Princeton, and UCLA in this case was to actually support us. Mm-hmm. That sort of thing, when you get that right, it can be really powerful. We were stronger in East Africa as a result of that Global North partnership than if we had not had it. But you have to get it right, and you have to pay a lot of attention to getting it right.
Thank you.
Can I add something
Please.
There as well? I mean, you've said that you'll be identifying 10 organizations. I'll be fascinated to see how many actual applications you get. So I think one of the things you could also be thinking about is surely if you're selecting 10, you'll probably have 25 that could easily be in the mix, if not 50. So what are you going, so you'll have the top 10, but what about that next group of 20? And when we think about the point that Rakesh made earlier about supporting making sure that organizations strengthen their capabilities, are there ways, additional resources or networking opportunities or access to conversations or exposure that you can also be providing, not just to the 10 organizations, but to those that are finalists or even semi-finalists?
One last intervention is, I just talk from the local organization's perspective, but let me talk about from the Brookings perspective. Secretary Guterres just made an announcement last September in the United Nations calling, and I think Barbara also talked about it, asking for pay attention to the recovery of learnings, because we have a problem as a generation. But I think that the countries, mine, for example, I think Mexico was not even there. But I can imagine as working with the minister 10 years ago, he could have been there and give some round of applauses and that's it. But I think that is different from for an institute like this one, when he can support a local organization, and then with those local organizations, maybe at a state level, then put some pressure at the national level. And I mean pressure, just getting to talk with him. So when András Schleicher used to visit Mexico, I mean, you had the minister and everyone right there listening to him, and the entrepreneurs and right there. So our organization was trying to set an agenda and keep the pressure with that discussion. So I think with the Brookings Institute, if you support some local organizations, then you can put some pressure at the national level and bring together some countries, and then universities, and then experts, and there you go with a coalition that has a local impact. So.
Jen, can I sneak in a footnote? I also think you may want to think about, when you think of your 10 local organizations, think of them as 10, maybe some global organizations just locally rooted in the Global South. When I was at Twaweza, we did not we were based in East Africa, but we did not consider ourselves a local organization. That was not our identity. We were a national, regional, and in some ways a global organization. There's something called the Open Government Partnership that some of you may have heard. We helped set it up out of Dar es Salaam. So I think one way of doing this is to think of some of your partners as intellectual peers in global leadership, but just because they are based in Dar es Salaam or Lima or Delhi doesn't make them just local and then you global. So interrogating what is local and global may also be a useful thing.
Thank you. I'm going to pull this to the end. And just want to thank, I don't know, I took a lot of notes personally for our own work. And so for me, this was a really rich discussion and opportunity to learn with you, and I hope for all of you that it was as well. So I want to thank our panelists, and I'm going to transition and take a few minutes away from the reception to just quickly tell everyone about the launch of this global coalition. So I'm going to stand here. So you can stay or you can leave. Okay, you can leave if you want. Okay, so in the morning you saw this slide. It probably looks familiar. Rebecca presented that. This is our new Knowing Doing Network, the way that we will be pulling together our thematic work streams and thematic work streams that others are working on under this one umbrella of a shared vision for systems transformation, a network of networks for learning and action in support of inclusive and holistic education, collaborative knowledge creation, strengthened ecosystems, coordinated action for systemic change. So this is the big network of networks that we're hoping to work with. And then within this, the model that we have is to work with a group of 10 organizations. You've heard it repeated here many times in the conversation today. And this is really thinking about, how can we have shared decision-making, shared creation of that, what is really going to be the agenda moving forward. So to co-creating that agenda for this Knowing Doing Network. What we didn't want was to have a Knowing Doing Network with CUE in the center saying this is what we should all be doing, but really pulling together a group of partners and peers, and I think importantly, as you were saying, intellectual partners in this work who may be rooted in the Global South, who can think together about what this work might look like moving forward. So today and we're now going live with the website, we're announcing the open call for expressions of interest for organizations to join this Knowing Doing Leadership Coalition. The Knowing Doing Leadership Coalition will work together to co-create the research agendas in plural, to engage in collaborative inquiry, so we'll be doing research together, shared learning around systems transformation toward inclusive and holistic learning. We'll be thinking together about how we connect the members of the broader Knowing Doing network across contexts, across thematic areas. I think importantly from this conversation across those levels that we talked about so much, from the very local to the global. And we'll be developing both locally specific and global communication and engagement strategies. So this will be an important part of our work as well around what are we all doing together, right? And what is it that ties us together? How do we talk about the work in ways that both are broad enough and expansive enough to be inclusive, but also hold us together in a way that we feel like we are doing part of the same work. Selected organizations, so these 10 will be eligible for sub-grants of up to $400,000 US. So that's $100,000 US per organization per year over the course of the project, which is 4 years, from 2023 to 2026. And who will be the KDNLC partners, or what types of organizations? So we're looking to work, as we've been saying, with civil society organizations who are working to inform evidence-based systems transformation. So I should say, Alicia, that was a misspeak on my part when I said they will be leading. These are organizations that are already leading, as you pointed out, this work in local education jurisdictions across the world. So we are planning to work with organizations that are geographically, economically, and culturally diverse in communities across the world, particularly in the Global South. So we have a focus on Global South organizations. We're looking for organizations that focus on holistic learning, the development of a breadth of skills, which we've been talking about throughout the day, for young people, and particularly for young people in marginalized contexts. We're looking to partner with organizations that are actively engaging actors across their local education ecosystem. So we talked a lot about government today, but we really want organizations that are looking across the expanse of the education ecosystem and engaging with partners in multiple spaces and in multiple ways. And we're really looking for partners who are eager to co-construct a collaborative space to explore, experiment, and learn with peers from across the world. That is our hope, and we are also really eager to see if we get 10 applications or 10,000. I never know which one we prefer. And usually when I look at this timeline, I get really afraid of the second. So we are now launching the call for expressions of interest. This is our official launch on February 17th, so here we are. The deadline to express interest is March 31st. So this will be a way for organizations to just say, hey, we're here, we're interested, and here's a little bit of information about us. Then we will be inviting eligible organizations, and there's a lot more information about eligibility on the website, which I'm about to show. So we'll be inviting all eligible organizations to fill out, to complete applications, and then we'll be having a review process throughout the summer with our selection decisions announced in July and August of this year. So this is when I say that if we have 10,000 applicants, we're going to maybe have to call you all back here to help us to review those 10,000 applications. And how to express interest in this opportunity, please visit and encourage to visit all of the civil society organizations that you know. Please encourage them to visit the KDNLC landing page. The KDNLC, please learn the acronym. It's the Knowing Doing Network Leadership Coalition. It's a mouthful. And it might change, but we wanted to wait and see if the KDNLC decides that's not the name, then we'll change it to something else. But we don't want to make that decision without them. So the website is www.brookings.edu/KDNLC. So you can also use that QR code to go directly there. There's more information on the page. We'll be having an information session for interested organizations on March 14th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so encourage as many people as possible, again, in organizations, and for all of you who are watching, or will watch later in the recorded version because it's very late at night in most parts of the world at this point, please come to the information session or share your questions with us, and we will be answering them and putting them on our website as well. And complete the KDNLC expression of interest form online. So again, you can find this information at this KDNLC landing page, and March 31st is the deadline for all of that. So with that, I will just say thank you. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you again to all of you for this wonderful day, for staying, making it through to the end. And really being a part with us of this work as we move forward. You know, as Rebecca talked about this morning, this is a community of learning. We are all part of the community together, and we are grateful that you have invested this time to spend with us today, to share your learning, to share your experience, and to really be part of this journey that has been ongoing and will continue, and that we're really excited to move forward with all of you together. So thank you, everyone. Help spread the word about the KDNLC. It rolls off the tongue. And I forgot my list of housekeeping things, but I know that we have a reception now, and so I believe the invitation is to everyone to move out of this space and to join us. We'll have drinks, we'll have snacks, and just a good time to celebrate the fact that we have had this very enriching and challenging and long day together. Thank you all.